Hi everyone, this is John Sneisen and welcome to the Economic Truth Report number 33. And today I'm very excited because today I'm actually bringing somebody from my good home country, Norway. His name is Rune Østgård, and I'm looking very much forward to talking to this guy because not only is he Norwegian, but he is a monetary historian. And there's not many of us. There's a few, but he wrote an amazing book that I just got from him, got signed from the author himself, of course. And so very excited. I did manage to read the most important part that I wasn't aware of, which was especially the Norwegian monetary history. So we're looking very much forward to discussing this, and everybody should buy this book. It's fantastic. It actually is not just monetary history in Norway, but also brings everything in through modern monetary history and everything that you need to know in a very great detail and very simple to read. So his book is called Fraud Coin, which I love. Great name on it. And looking forward to speaking with you, Rune. If you could give people a little introduction to yourself and what you do and how you got to, write this book.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me, John. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time now. And yeah, short about me. I'm 51 years old. I'm Norwegian. I live in Trøndelag, which is a big part in the middle of Norway. I'm a lawyer by education, and I have a small law firm here in Steinkjer, a small town which has some 15,000 inhabitants, I think. And I'm also an author, so I've written 4 books now, and the book that you showed the viewers now was my second book, and I've just released a 3rd book, which is named Unbar. It's about monetary system and globalization. And my 4th book, which is named Arrow of Truth, is about Bitcoin, and it will be released now this winter. So a couple of months or 3 months until the release. It hasn't been decided yet. So that's me. I'm a family man. I have a live together. I live in Sin. I've been engaged for almost 20 years now. So and we have a daughter. She's very soon approaching 18 years old. So yeah, we live in a farm on the countryside, just north of this small town, Steinkjer.
It's very interesting, because a lot of people that I talk to around, that are, libertarian or kind of aligned with freedom like ideas, they seem to all live on the countryside for some reason now. It's very interesting. You talk to some of the greatest minds that I talk to. A lot of them moved out of the bigger cities, and they, I feel the reason for that is probably because there's less, government interference when you're on the countryside, and it's nice, to live especially on a farm in these days. It's very good to hear that you're doing that. That's probably one of the better things to do, especially at the point where we're at with monetary history. Because also, as we are here in Canada or in the United States, wherever you are in the world right now, we're all on this global fiat currency standard, which we never have had throughout history. It's quite amazing, that we've all gotten in on this, what I like to call the Ponzi scheme, which debts-based interest charging monetary systems are, because you can't just taper the Ponzi scheme. You can't let the debt collapse, because then the whole system collapses because it's based on it. So I wanted to first ask you about something what I've been looking super much forward to, and that is if you could give us a little bit of a synopsis of what happened in Norway in the early days, like during the Viking era, and how did Norwegians start upon their journey of their monetary history? Because when I moved over, I kind of like just got into the American, the Canadian, and so on monetary history, and I haven't really touched upon Norwegian history. I knew a tiny little bit about it, but very little. So I'm very excited if you could give us a little bit of an insight, how it started and where it's gotten to. But let's start early and then move chronologically through it all, and very much looking forward to it.
Okay, great. I think that's a good start. And if you don't mind, I would like to give it some perspective. If we start with the international development of what I call inflation as a policy, or basically it's monetary policy, because all monetary policy is about creating inflation in terms of inflating the money supply, and monopolizing the monetary system. That's all what it's about. And that's something which started, as far as I know, at least in Athens around 440 years before Christ, when they fought the wars against the Spartan Empire. And so they financed the wars with a combination of taxation and inflating the money supply. So in order to inflate the money supply, you have to sort of force your monetary system upon your population. So what they did most likely was that they required that the people of Athens and people who came there to trade with them, they had to use the official silver coins that they most likely created in a mint or several mints down there. So people had to come to the mint with their silver, and they would probably melt it down and create silver coins for them that they could use when they traded, and also very important that they had to use these coins most likely when they paid the taxes. So very often also it's a sort of a coercive type of legislation that if you don't accept the coins, you will be punished in some way or another. So
legal tender laws.
Yes, legal tender. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So in Norwegian we have a quite more I think a better expression than legal tender, because we call it tvungent betalingsmiddel. And
I love it.
Yeah, and that's basically the same as the means of payment that you are obliged to use. While legal tender, it sounds like something which you are allowed to, you sort of are permitted to use.
Yeah, tvunget means almost like forced.
Yeah, forced.
Yeah,
coerced. Yeah.
Love it.
So if we go back again in time, and we know that the inflation policy then appeared also in the Roman Empire towards the end of the first. Nice. You have coins from that period.
Yeah.
How old are the oldest coins that you have?
The oldest ones, they're at year 100, so they're actually real silver denariuses. So actually, we're talking about the inflationary policy. I just wanted to show people, because a lot of people don't know what is happening. But as you can see here, the older they get, it's 212 BC, and then what is this? That's not silver. This is year 340. And so, but just continue, because that's like what you're going to get into here is why is that not silver, that last one?
Yes, and I think what we probably need to understand is that this was something which spread over time, and most likely because it was seen as a very effective, or perhaps effective is the right term here, and not so much efficient, I would say. The effective means of financing wars, The problem is it becomes almost too easy to finance wars. You embark on conquests that you probably should do as a ruler. So it forces all the other countries which you engage with to think very hard. Should I also incorporate a similar type of monetary policy, because I need to extract wealth from my people in order to finance the war, either aggressively by conquest, going towards my neighbors, or defensively my neighbor finances his aggressive war against me with inflation, and if I don't do the same, I might lose against him. But you know, if we learn from history, for instance, the first wars between or the wars between the Athenians and the Spartans, we saw that the Athenians, they lost in the end after they were besieged by the Spartans. I think they fought for several decades, and so it might be that many sort of, this is very easy money, you know, it's easy to finance a war with inflation, and perhaps it makes them makes the rulers too aggressive, to sort of, it goes to their head, they get some they get affected by hubris, as we call it, you know, they think they can win everything basically, and then they in the end they lose it all. So, but what's also important, that it seems to me that the spreading of this policy, of course, it spread throughout the whole Roman Empire. I would imagine that they had the same type of legislation throughout the Roman Empire. So they forced their people to use their silver coins, and the problem is that, yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about religion as well, because it's very important in this respect. But you know, when you start to debase your silver coins, or you introduce paper as money, you basically sort of poison your own economy. It's not very good for the economy to have unsound money, money that is constantly being debased. So what will happen is that capital and talent will probably flow out of a country where you, at least where you have an aggressive monetary policy, and into countries where you have monetary freedom. So what you risk is that the capital and the talented people might go to other areas where you have monetary freedom, where you can use the best money available with stable content of silver and gold. So it creates a lot of tension between countries where you constantly sort of get this motivation for the rulers then to continue to conquest, to try to rule your neighbors and so on. And what's quite fascinating is that the Roman Empire, they also started to Christianize their empire. They were pagans, you know, or had a sort of heathen religion in the beginning of the first, and I think also the second, and might also have been in the 3rd century, and then gradually they embraced Christianity, and both means both the Christianization and the monetary policy was used to rule their own people, and also used in aggressively, I would say, in the conquest of other people. So it created a lot of tension. And up north in the Scandinavian countries, and also in the what you call
Germania,
Germanic,
Germanic regions,
they weren't Christianized that early, so it became you got a whole lot of tension between the Roman Empire and those other parts of Europe. And in my area, in my region of Norway, they were sort of the holdouts for a very long time. My ancestors, they stuck with their old religion and didn't want to be Christianized. But then towards I think it began in the 9th century. The first Norwegian king tried to introduce Christianization, or tried to introduce Christianity in Norway. And he did it by sort of voluntary means. He wanted his people to embrace Christianity. But my people, at least in the middle of Norway, we resisted and didn't want to go along with his policies. And then came a couple of kings which used the sword to introduce Christianity.
Yeah, that's
and
when a lot of heads rolled in Norway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, they forced the big sort of the powerful farmers, you know, the landowners, the people who had some kind of, call it probably a little bit of political power as well, but more like they were natural elites, because the society where I live now at least until year 1000 or something, there weren't basically any rulers here. They didn't have any power at all. And they hated kings, so they killed kings and chased them away if they
It was
tried
decentralized. Like, it was actually decentralized manner, you know, which is, you know, I'm a decentralized guy, you know, understanding history. That pendulum swings all the time, and I think we're getting there now in history, that we're, you know, swinging towards that tyrannical part of it, and it might just go back. I really hope so, for the better of humanity,
Yes.
for better of people. But yeah. Sorry, keep continuing.
Yeah. So this is very important, actually, what you are talking about there, because we try to we look past, look towards the past, you know, and try to learn from history, and then we project what we interpret from the past, and say that, well, it takes very long time to get a development in the other that goes in the other direction, etc. And my analytical framework now, having written a number of books on this topic, is that what I call layer 0 is the people's belief system, and the first layer in civilization is the monetary system, and then you got all the other layers built on top of the monetary system. Yeah. That's how a civilization is built. And the monetary system is sort of a product of the people's and also the rulers' belief system. So if you have people who love sovereignty and love their freedom, they tend to also embrace monetary freedom, the right to use what money you like best, and that's basically what has been the most dominant monetary system throughout the history of civilization of. And then very.
But that's what you hear you hear the least about, because only the victors like to write their books in history. You don't hear much about that side of actually real freedom part of history that you know, you're going to be talking about here.
That's correct. So and you know, if we jump a little bit closer to our day and age, we don't have to go further than to the 19th century. You had monetary freedom in most of the 19th century, both in Argentina and in the United States. So it's not that very long ago that we had it in the western part of the world. And but back again to Norway around year 1000 after Christ, and the situation was that the kings started to try to introduce Christianity, and at the same time they tried to introduce some sort of Norwegian coinage. But up to then, we were using coins from all over the world, everywhere, from the Arab countries and
from trade, right? Like, what people don't understand is that the Vikings actually, you know, all you hear about is the raping and pillaging that they did, but they also did a lot of trade around the world. Like, I remember, you know, going to the Viking museums in Oslo, and they have a lot of interesting history there with trade with, you know, the Middle East and all around the world, and they use the rivers, and that's how they actually like got to different places around the world. And it's pretty amazing, like, how far-reaching the Norwegian influence was at the time, with, you know, especially with the trade and trade routes and all this stuff, and so it's pretty unique part of history that you don't really hear too much about.
Yes, most, you know, we watch the movies and the series on the TVs, you know, and it's a whole lot of violence all the time. And but in my area, I suspect that my people 1,000 years ago, they were quite peaceful, because Trøndelag, my part of Norway, was very rich in resources. We had probably most of I think very few other places had that much access to iron, for instance, iron ores, and also it was very good to do farming in this area, and we had fish and game, and the woods, and we had all kinds of natural resources, and having the freedom component, with no kings that ruled us, and I think it was a very busy time with trade with all parts of the world, actually, and I suspect that very little of the Viking crusades, or what you call it, originated from my part of Norway, because why should we risk provoking other countries, other cultures? Then they would come back and haunt us, and try to have their revenge by So I think it was this part of Norway. I think it was mainly trade and farming, and also hunter-gatherers, etc.
And they actually go hand in hand, the implementation of a monopoly of currency, and then you also devalue it. You have to find resources elsewhere because you're devaluing your currency, and you have to ship the currency elsewhere. There's been many, like after the Viking era, there's been so many places around the world. They are great trade, places, like Virginia, for example, in the United States, before the US dollar was a thing. They had a currency that they were trading everywhere. They were doing great, but they got into the monopoly money, and they started to print more and more of it, issue more and more, and then suddenly people's like, hey, it's buying me less now. What's going on there? And then so that comes then that currency came back towards Virginia and created hyperinflation. And so it's again, you start trading and doing all this stuff, but then again, if you do it's like they're dropping poison in the water well. Like that's basically
definitely
what the monetary system is, and the ideas of centralization.
Yeah, because it benefits the first user, the one that controls the system. It's the king, and it's the rich people in the country, the people who get access to this first, the wealthy.
Yeah.
So, and everybody else they have to pay up the cover the cost. They experience that they earn a little bit more money because there is more money in circulation in society, but the prices go up much faster than their earnings, and that's sort of the transfer of wealth from the work they do, and also from their savings, and until the transfer of wealth from them and to the first users, the king, the rulers, the wealthy.
Yeah.
So
how did the kings of North, like, how did it came to be that peaceful Trøndelag, that was a kind of a trade place, and people lived in not in harmony, but like they lived more voluntarily, where they chose to trade with each other instead of going and invading and killing each other. How did that idea then get to the Trøndelag, and we know like that was used to be like the seat of the great Viking kingdom, and so on, and through its history. So let's hear how we got there.
So where we got where to the where they embraced freedom, or where
the opposite.
The opposite, yeah.
Yeah. So, where they got
So the first kings that tried to introduce Christianity by sword and forcing the people to adopt the new religion. They tried also to create coins, and probably tried to implement a monopoly in money creation. So the first coins, they had the Christian cross on the one side and the king's symbol on the other side. The first coins we know, I think, with these symbols came just before year 1000 after Christ. But they didn't succeed in making any sort of substantial coinage in Norway. We don't know if the coins were created in Norway even. Most likely they were made outside of Norway. And then over time, they managed the kings. They managed to force people to accept Christianity. They just left their old religion. So you see, this affected their belief system. So I see you are doing something.
Yeah,
with the
just
screen,
yeah, I'm just showing
yeah.
people so they could see this is
Yeah.
you know the earliest kind of forms of currency in Norway. So just keep on continuing. I'm just gonna show people
Yeah.
if there's some interesting stuff that you talk about if I can find it.
Yeah. So when they changed people's religion, or people changed their religion, we might also we should expect that it affected their belief system in a broad sense. And of course, the kings, they were the Christian church or the religion's main representative in Norway. You know, the king represented God in Norway. So, and of course, since we had this very special laws in my part of Norway, which was called the resistance law, resistance provision, it said that a ruler, a king, who tries to take someone's property without the consent from it was sort of a council of elders, a Frostating. It's a sort of a court that we had, which covered all of Trøndelag. So if the kings wanted to tax the people, and the people didn't accept the king's proposal, and the king just took the people's property and disregarded the will of the people, then everybody had the obligation to hunt down the king, to try to kill him, actually. And if they didn't succeed in doing that, they had to chase him out of the country. And that was something which also the people made use of in a very effective way. Several times, actually. So they killed one of the kings, for instance, in 1030, just 50 kilometers south of here.
Yeah, and it's very similar to the Second Amendment, what it's actually supposed to be in the United States, by the way.
Definitely, it's that's a great point. And so, but you know, when people got used to the idea that the king is God's representative in Norway, it probably made it more difficult for them to sort of to keep to continue with that kind of idea, that they have the right and the obligation to fight against the king. So in 1050, he killed one of the sort of natural elite men here, a leader, one of the landowners just south of where I live. And they also killed his son. And afterwards, the people of my region, they didn't go after the king. And when king, his name is Harald Hardråde, realized that they wouldn't go after him and come and hunt him down, he introduced the first monopoly in money creation in Norway. And that happened in 1050. So he basically started out creating coins which had a silver content of 90%, and he debased the coins down to almost 30% in just 16 years. So that's basically inflation rate of 7% on average per year, if you see it that way. Yeah. So that's a long sort of the perspective and some of the details on that. But what's very interesting that I have uncovered and summarized and presented some of the details of, you know, it's I'm showing that these were real people. I have the names of the people, I have the stories, and I included it in the book, which makes it easy to understand what this is all about it sort of puts flesh and bones to something which else in many other books can be perhaps presented as a dry theory, you might say. So I try to bring life to the theory and make it easy for people to understand what inflation is all about, and the sort of the driving forces behind the inflation, and also, of course, how it affects society once it has been implemented. That's my sort of mission statement, you might say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very interesting to see what happened through Norway through that time, and there was several places. There was I forgot the guy's name, but they actually created several mints around Norway, like where they minted coinage, and one of them was in Hamar, which is closer to where I grew up. But I'm pleased to say that I do have heritage up in Trøndelag, you know, on my dad's side with the Sneisen family. So it's
great.
yeah, it's good to have that. Maybe that's why I'm at where I'm at today, the DNA of freedom, you know, of Great Trøndelag. Yeah. So, but it's interesting. This idea has then spread throughout Norway. That, you know, was a good way to, you know, like, oh, let's centralize, you know, let's try, you know, create this currency and then trade it. But what ended up happening from your book when I was reading about it, which is very interesting, little tidbit of information, is that people took the silver coinage that they had and then went elsewhere where their currency was you know, still had value, because there was a big difference between the official legal tender, which was, you know, the coinage minted by the king, versus the old coinage that was you know, laying around. There was a huge discount officially, of course. So what ended up happening is they started, you know, going elsewhere to then make trades, because they at these other places they actually you know, had better value, actually real value, if you can say that.
Yeah, it's called Gresham's law, as I'm quite sure you are aware of. And what we can expect is that some of the, you know, until 1050, or until he started introducing the monopoly in money creation, Harald Hardråde, we had about 99.9% of the coins which were in circulation, they were foreign coins.
Yeah.
So created by others than the kings. And in just 16 years, the percentage was reduced to about 30. So 30% of the coins were foreign coins in 1066. So what we can expect is that quite a lot of the coins from before the policy started, where they were melted down and used in the coinage of the new king's coins, we can say. And also we can expect that a lot of the coins went abroad, where they could be used to a greater effect. You could they were more highly appreciated.
You just get real value.
You get real value
versus the discount.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's very important, and also probably they just stuck away. They saved some of the good old coins with a high silver share and gold share of gold. You know, so that's what that's the kind of the dynamics you always will see when you introduce monetary policy. And also, I think what people need to understand is that we could probably expect that also people left to the other parts of Europe where it was easier to use other types of money than in Trøndelag and in Norway. And because, you know, Harald, he was quite a harsh type. He introduced the death penalty for everybody who didn't accept his coins. So he was a tyrant.
Sounds like Zimbabwe just recently in 2008 had similar policies.
Did I? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's awful. Oh,
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's very interesting because what they're trying to do is just force you to do it. Like in Zimbabwe's case, it was just that they were using gold and silver because their currency was completely worthless. And I just like let's have a little bit of this is cool because I don't talk about this a lot, and I don't think I've really shown it, but like this is what happens, when you have history here, guys. It's like this was Zimbabwe. You could see the zeros just go up. And it just continues, up and up and up, and then until you hit the 100 trillion Zimbabwe note there, and people didn't get wealthier. They became trillionaires and quadrillionaires, but they weren't wealthier. And what ends up happening too in a lot of countries, and we've seen this in countries like, especially when the countries in Europe kind of collapsed there during under big governments like the southern parts, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece. A lot of the productive, and you just talked about this, a lot of the productive people and productive capital moves elsewhere where it's freer to, be able to do that economic activity that they want. And so the people that are productive, they leave the country. And now you're left with lesser productive people a lot of times. And so what ends up happening is that basically, what ends up happening down south in Europe is that now you're like all the business people, the people that actually drove the economy, the small business owners, because they got destroyed. They're just trying to find business elsewhere. It's happening in Canada right now, and also even in Norway to a certain extent, where people are just getting strangled by, the taxation from, and that comes from the possibility to make a legal tender like the force that law has. It's actually to then be able to tax you in it. Because if we didn't use it, how can you tax people? Like it'd be very hard to enforce taxation without that monopoly on the currency itself.
Yeah. So we could probably imagine that the first thing the king would do once he started to be having sort of successfully introduced inflation as a policy was that the first wealth that he extracts from his people by the means of forcing them to use his coins, and they have to give some of the silver to him, when he forces them to use his coins, then he probably uses some of the wealth to buy weapons and to pay soldiers. So he gets stronger. He builds up a security state and armed forces, and then he can start to implement harsher taxes. So people have to pay more money in taxation and all kinds of fees to the state, So basically, it's very important to understand that, because it sort of also reflects what I said previously, that the monetary system is the foundation for civilization, and all the other layers in society builds upon that. So you get very different types of civilization depending on what kind of monetary system you have. So the civilization you build with a monetary system based on monetary freedom and sound money is very, very different also politically, and how the state apparatus, etc., compared to the civilization you build on top of for instance a fiat money system.
Yeah, and it also always starts with good things like the Roman Empire. They were a republic to begin with, which had more emphasis on individual freedom. But then with the debasement of currency, they started to then take chip away, slowly at the individual freedom. And of course, it was the monopoly minting power that they had that really destroys that, because now it's by force, and it's like the government could just do it, very easily, versus if there was competing currencies that could be in there and actually be used as mediums of exchange. And so, but this is not like a Viking era thing, is it? I have some examples here, and I know the same thing happened in Norway as well. But in modern times, we use the same tactics like they started with in the Greek Empire. The debasement of currency, where you said that he confiscated silver and then he mints new currency. But what he does a lot of time, and what they do when they have monopoly power, they just put a little bit less into the coins. And first it's trying to hide the devaluation of that currency by maybe instead of 95%, maybe let's go down to 80% and see if can get away with it. Some places you can't, and even in your book, you're talking about the example of, I think it was one of the warlords or people that were kind of an advisor or something in Iceland at the time, where he was like, "Well, what the hell did you do here? Like you literally are trying to basically pay me less than you did before." And so people actually catch up to that. And what ends up happening, which is very interesting, why don't we have silver coinage running in circulation in both Norway and Canada? We had it. Why is it not there anymore? Well, it's because people catch up to that, and that the good money the bad money drives out the good initially,
money.
right? And so you have like for example, here's an example. This is like a 1968 25-cent coin from Canada versus this one, which is 25 cent. Well, this one right now, so it's worth it's not numismatic at all. It doesn't have a numismatic value, but it's actually worth $7 almost. Versus this one is worth 25 cents. And it's because it's 80% silver in it. They did the same with their coinage. This one here I bought for 98 cents. It's $1 coin from Canada. But sorry, this one is a $1 coin, and 98 cents I bought this one for. Well, guess this is a $1 coin for prior 1968. That's when Canadian government did it. And this one here is worth now about $25 versus 98 cents of a coinage today, and it's because it has silver content in it. And then we go down to the lower currency. Here I have just an example. It's the penny that they had in Canada, which is our form in Norway. It's called øre, which is the lower denominated currency. But that one had, to begin with, it had 95% copper in it. And at the last, they actually got rid of it. And let me tell you this story because you'll find it very interesting. The coincidence that what happened with, but it started at 95%, and when they got rid of it, it was only 5% copper in it. And so just pure debasement. I actually worked at the Royal Canadian Mint in Manitoba, Winnipeg, which mints coinage actually for Norway as well. I don't know if you were aware of that.
No,
they do mint for the whole world, basically, where there's not mints locally that mints currency. They actually mint everything here, like for 100+ countries. And what was interesting with we talked about the øre, the penny, because it got up to, I think, 4 cents the cost to make it a 1 cent coin. So like basically it was worth way more than, the face value of the currency. You can't have that. And so that's in Canada when they got rid of it. But guess what? The same freaking day that they got rid of the 1 penny, the copper, the last vestiges of the copper coin in Canada, well, they got rid of the 50 øre in Norway at the same almost exact time. And so it seems like there was a policy there. It's like, well, we're not minting any more copper coins, so we're not minting the 50 øre as well. And that was demonetized basically very similar times, actually. But again, it's again, like it's becoming too much value to make it, so you can't. Like, for example, a $2 coin in Canada, it's probably gone up now since COVID. But when I asked the Royal Canadian Mint, it was 15 cents to make a $2 coin. And that difference, it's supposed to then go back to the treasury, which is called seigniorage. You talk about that in your book. And it's the difference between the cost to make it and the actual face value. For example, in the United States, it's $1.98 to make a $100 bill. And then all of that is supposed to go back to the government, of course. But again, here in Winnipeg, this is interesting little tidbit of information, is that the Royal Canadian Mint is actually the land is owned by the Queen, now the King Charles, of course. And he actually owns the property that it's on. And when I went, I actually worked there. That's how I know a lot of this stuff. And I worked there. And what is there? There's the rules of the royal family, like their actual rules. It wasn't Canadian law; it was British royal law. That was, you know, if you steal or whatever you did, like it was actually under their legal legislative body, and not the Canadian governments.
Okay.
So very interesting little tidbit of information there. And so I did all the cameras and all that stuff there. But one thing that I did to kind of sabotage, you know, the whole Royal Canadian, it's not something very nasty or anything bad that's criminal. But I did at the peak of like it looks like a pyramid with an all-seeing eye, basically the whole building, which is based there. But on top there's like 2 cameras that I was cleaning right on top of a spire of the whole church of the Royal Canadian Mint, I call it. But I put the Bitcoin, you know, I wrote in a Sharpie like with like black, you know, paint, with like the Bitcoin emblem is on top of the building just to troll them. But
That's a great story.
Yeah, I thought that was funny because I was working on their, like I worked on their CCTV cameras and all this stuff. But
Yeah.
actually the last messages, so now, okay, so they have nickel and all kinds of other stuff in there now. But actually now, it's just like tiny little plating on the Canadian coins, and they have steel coins now, basically. So like it's gone to like now we just have steel coins instead of silver. And so that's kind of the story, and it's similar story for Norway as well. If you were to go into maybe a little bit latter history of like more modern times, where Norway has been sitting, like currently, like because Norway, I don't know the numbers and everything, so that's why I have you on here. But can you kind of describe what ended up happening in Norway over the last, you know, 100-something years, where Norway used to have gold and silver coinage, and then now we're kind of in the same boat as Canada.
Okay, so in 1814, we had been until then for several hundred years under the Danish rule, you might say, sort of a union with them, but they ruled us. And when they lost the war, I think it was the last Napoleon war. They had to sort of give away Norway, so we came in a union with Sweden, but we were allowed to have our own constitution. It came in 1814, and I think just 2 years afterwards, in 1816, we had our first central bank here in Norway.
And it was the specie dollar, it was called the currency, right?
Yeah, it might be. Yes, I don't know the details there.
But I pulled it up, so I'll help you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we were on a silver standard, I understand, and then later on we switched to a gold standard. I think it was in 1873.
Yeah.
And you know what happened in the 1870s was that most of the developed countries, they adopted, at least in the western part of the world, they adopted the gold standard. And many people, they think that a lot of the prosperity and the sort of the good times, the economic times in the 19th century were due to the gold standard, but that's not my opinion, at least. I think it was much more important that both the United States and Argentina, they had monetary freedom in most parts of the 19th century. And it attracted a whole lot of talent and capital, also away from Norway. Actually, in 1800, we had a population of 900,000 people in Norway. And between 1836 and 1915, 750,000 people fled from Norway and to America. And Argentina, they attracted a lot of people from Spain and also Italy and other countries as well. So these countries, these big countries in Americas, they attracted wealth and capital and talent and people from Europe in an enormous amount of people and capital that escaped over the Atlantic Ocean. And I think that made it probably quite difficult for the rulers in Europe to sort of continue to profit from the power, the political power that they had. So it was very little taxation in Norway, I know, and around in year 1900, the public sector, they spent just 6% of GDP in Norway. Most likely because they weren't able to confiscate wealth in Norway. But they did extract wealth using the monetary policy, although they were on the gold standard, and it was the same also in the United States. They adopted the gold standard in 1879. They didn't have a central bank, so they weren't able to enforce it to any meaningful extent, but they actually between 1880 and 1895, in the 15 years period, they expanded the money supply of the US dollars by 150%. That was after the introduction of the gold standard. So it didn't secure sort of a low degree of monetary inflation at all, the gold standard. That's a myth. That's my perception, at least. But what it did was that it secured a totally different level of international coordination of the inflation policy or the monetary policy. And when we came to 1914, the outbreak of the First World War, they suspended the gold standard, as they call it, all over the world, or most parts of the world. I don't think they did it in the United States, but at least in Europe they did it, also not in quite. Norway.
But they created a central bank in 1913 on 23rd of December.
They did. Yeah. That's a very interesting story as well. And but actually, what had happened throughout Europe was probably that all the countries had inflated their money supply, and when the war broke out, people lined up in front of the banks, and they wanted to redeem paper bills for gold. Yeah. And then the banks called to the central bank, and the central bank called to the Ministry of Finance, and the government met, and they said, well, you don't have to give gold to the people, because then it will disappear out of the country, and it's an state of emergency. So they suspended the gold standard. So that, in effect, that transferred a whole lot of wealth from the people and to the government, and also to the rich people. And during the First World War, they expanded the money supply a whole lot. They tripled the money supply in Norway in just 3 or 4 years, and the prices skyrocketed. The prices also tripled. And of course, that meant a new transfer of wealth from the private sector and to the or most parts of the private sector and to the state. And also, of course, the rich people started to extract a lot of wealth, because they could borrow money at low rates, and invested them in property, in
real assets,
businesses, etc. In real assets, yes. Yeah. So from that period and onwards, the public is started to grow a whole lot. And if you compare, as I said, in 1900, the public sector, they spent 6% of GDP. But in 2022, the public sector of Norway, it spent 66% of GDP. The mainland GDP, we exclude the oil, the offshore economy from that calculation.
Well, so that excludes the oil part of GDP. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
So look at that, guys. 66%. Like now we're sorry to interrupt you, but that's almost like we're getting up to like places like Timor-Leste, North Korea. Like that's the amount of size of the government as a part of GDP. I actually started a political party here in Manitoba, which I can't vote, but I can start a political party. But I had a presentation when I started this And I actually made the correlation between government as a part of expenditure to GDP versus taxation. And people, the politicians just walked out the door that were there for the presentation. They didn't like that.
Yeah.
But it's pretty insane. So what that means is, people get this in the context. So 66% of the whole economy is now government. Well, what is supposed to fund the government is the private sector. Well, now the private sector is supposedly just 44% of the economy. And so you're supposed to tax the 44% to fund
34.
Yeah, 34. So yeah, sorry, it worse. So the 34% is supposed to fund, through the stealing of taxation, supposed to fund, the 66% of the government. That's pretty insane, and that's that's what collapsed basically the southern parts of Europe. Like, they went above that. That's what ended up happening. They were above 50%. They were above 50%. Norway is 66% if you remove, of course, the oil. Norway looks a lot better if you include, the oil, of course. So that's kind of how they're
bit,
like,
yes.
So that's how they're trying to be like, oh yeah, it looks so much better now. But really, it's
crazy. And if you compare it with the Soviet Union, they had, when they had communism, on paper, 100% of the GDP was the public sector, because you didn't have private sector on paper, but you had a black market there. And if they didn't have the black market, they wouldn't have been able to have the same living standards. So their things wouldn't have worked at all, and I've talked to some people who say that, the size of the public sector in terms of the money that they spend as a share of GDP is it might be at the same level as it was in the Soviet Union when you take into account the black economy.
That should be a wake-up call for our dear Norwegian friends.
Yeah.
It's like,
the politicians, they don't want to hear that.
Yeah, no, this is like, it should be a wake-up call, because I've been, trying to talk to a lot of my Norwegian family, and some of them are kind of like warming up to the idea. I was saying, like, 10 years ago, it's like, hey, put a little bit in gold and silver, like, have something there to protect your wealth. And then, of course, they did not. And of course, instead, the prices have gone up quite substantially in terms of Norwegian krona, in that terms. So now we're in current in Norway, and we're going to take it over to, other solutions of what we could do. But before that, we're in great trouble. And then, of course, you got the government lockdowns that happen in Norway and all around the world. And so you got super heavy inflation. The real, of course, the main reason for the inflation numbers that the government has is so they could keep as low as possible, the payments that the governments have to do. So they manipulate those numbers, the official numbers that you have. And probably real inflation numbers in Norway, like here in Canada, I believe it was probably 25%. They were officially saying 7%. In Norway, it was ridiculously low. It was like the official number was like 4 or 5%, I think it was. But then again, you go to the grocery store and everywhere else. My mom was telling me about. And let's talk about that, for example, like our current, like how's Norway look now? For example, over the last 5 years, what would you say? Like, your book came out at a very great time, by the way, because.
Jeg må bytte mikrofon. I have to.
Okay, yeah, we just had a little technique. That's fine.
Just 1 second.
So yeah, so what in Norway, what ended up happening is we had so much inflation, and inflation was going, have been running rampant. But we just have a little technical issue with Rune. But so in Norway, what ends up happening, and from a lot of Norwegian friends and family, is that the food inflation and everything else was going up quite rapidly. Even the main Norwegian newspaper, Verdens Gang, VG, actually wrote about that as probably more likely 70%, the real food inflation. And so, and of course, Norway is probably one of the biggest, together with Canada, actually. Canada and Norway is very similar. It's very interesting. But Norway had an insane debt bubble because what ends up happening when you have a big government, big taxation, and high inflation? People have to keep their living standards somehow. Well, they go in debt, and that's what ends up happening. So people are, trying to keep afloat and keeping their standard of living. Well, they have to add on, the real estate debt goes drastically up. Of course, credit cards and private loan debt goes through the roof. The car loans and everything else. So it's quite devastating. So if you want to go into the last like 5 years in Norway and what you've seen, from your standpoint, because I've been here in Canada, so I only seen what's been going on in Canada. I kind of heard parts and bits of it, but you have way more analysis than my family would per se. So I'd love to hear like what's been going on in Norway over the last 5 years with the massive interventions that's been going on.
Okay, so if we just start out with the rate of monetary inflation, how much they increase the money supply each year on average. If we go back to the year that I was born in 1972 and compare with 2022, the Norwegian government and the banking sector, the central bank has inflated the amount of money quite a lot. It's on average 8.75% per year.
Wow.
If we compare
official.
that to the United, I'm sorry.
Official number.
That's the M2 money supply. Yeah. And if you compare with the United States, it's 7% per year in the same 50-year period on average. And if we then go to the last 20 years, or 2002 to 2022, it's 7% per year on average in Norway, as it has been in the United States. But Norwegian kroner isn't the world's reserve currency. So we can't export our inflation to other countries. So in order to stay on that high level of monetary inflation, we have to have a very sound economy. It could be possible to do it if you had growth in the economy and a small public sector and a low level of taxation, which we don't have, and you have covered that now. And so what has happened now the last 15 years, we pay twice as much for the American dollar as we did in today as we did in 2008. And we have to pay 50% more to get €1 compared to 2008. So compared with the biggest currencies, our currency has been devalued a whole lot. So that, of course, extracts wealth from the people and to the wealthy. And another thing which you mentioned there was the level of debt. So until last year, we had stayed for some years on the very top, and not at the top of the debt levels in the world, but we were placed at the number 2 spot behind Denmark. So Denmark, I think they had 235% or something like that of available income per household. 235%, I think it was. And then we surpassed Denmark last year. So now we are the leaders in terms of having the most debt per household compared to available income. We are above 240% now. So it's a very bad situation, actually. The currency is worth much less than it used to be, and we have more debt than we have ever had, at least in the private sector. The public sector is totally different, of course. I think it's less than 40% of GDP.
Yeah, 34, 35, I think it's at, yeah.
Yeah, it's something like that. And in the United States, for comparison, it's around 124 or something like that, I think, percent of GDP. So
yeah, so actually, let's just so I look at something called private debt to GDP. it's very interesting. Norway was actually right up there. You know, Luxembourg is the biggest one by far, which is 449. Now Sweden has taken Norway's spot. That, you know, it's always competition between Sweden and Norway. They're going the same as the Norwegians. At least they're more they have more of a private sector, but it's still like pretty bad. But so Norway, the number now is actually 239. Norway's gone far down. Norway's dropped very severely, actually. Norway's dropped from we were up at 323% private debt. So that's also corporate debt, by the way. That's in there. So it was at 323.43% in 2020. And then it dropped all the way down to 239.17. It was hovering very high. Like it's been on average 200, like in 2015, 292, 2016, 301, then 287, 277, 291. So it's been up there, but it's actually dropped like very, very substantially in Norway, down to 239.17%.
That's strange. That surprised me.
Yeah, that's quite wild actually. But what I assume that is of course debt is collapsing in Norway. You know, there's the problem, like defaults are going up, of course, but the debt to GDP. So I guess GDP is kind of gone up in Norway, but like it hasn't gone up that much because oil hasn't risen that much. You know, but interesting that you were talking about with in regards to oil, you know, the Brent crude, which oil, you know, the offshore oil in Norway is called, that spot price, it's priced in what? Not Norwegian kroner, it's priced in dollars. And so Norwegians have to then exchange, you know, that to be able to sell to other countries, they have to get to the world reserve currency dollar to then, you know, do the transaction of that oil to other countries. But yeah, so Norway is very heavily indebted. So let's get back to that. You know, we're just talking about early, like we're kind of getting into what's been happening, you know, in the last 5 years.
Yeah, so the debt levels, at least the household debt is very high, and the currency has been just losing a lot of value over the last few years. And at the same time, you know, because we have this huge income, at least the public sector, the state has an enormous income from the taxation of the oil companies. I don't know how much they pay from their profits, but it's a huge percentage. And what we have done in Norway is that I think it was in 1998 we started what we call a sovereign wealth fund. That's a investment fund owned by the state. And today it's the largest sovereign wealth fund in the whole world. I think it's competing a little bit with the Chinese fund. And
let me just address, it owns 1% of all stocks in the world.
Yeah, 1%. I've heard that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's quite big, yes. And it only invests in foreign stocks and foreign bonds and a little bit of real estate abroad, not in Norway at all. And the excuse or the explanation for that was that they argued before they established this fund that if the income was invested in Norway, it would cause inflation. Well, it's stupid, you know, because what would have happened would be that if we kept that capital in Norway, we would have increased productivity, thus creating a higher amount of services and services units and goods units, you know, so it would have actually reduced inflation if we had kept the capital in and invested it in Norway instead of sending it to other countries. So the fund is huge, and we have a rule which is called the budgetary rule, which says that 3% of the fund, which is the expected net profit that the fund earns, that can be transferred back to the Norwegian budget, to the state budget, and they can spend it. The politicians can spend it. The problem is that this creates perverse incentives for the politicians, because if the Norwegian currency goes down in value, it means that they can spend more money in Norwegian kroner terms, because they exchange it's denominated, the fund is denominated in foreign currency, and when the Norwegian krone goes down in value, then they can spend a whole lot more Norwegian kroner in Norway on everything that they would like to spend it on. The politicians, they have grand ideas on what they want to use it for, some pet projects, all of them. So it sort of creates, most likely, a vicious spiral where they those who have the possibility to stop this debasement going on, they don't have incentives, because it would mean that they can spend less money over the public budgets. So as long as the system is designed the way it is today, we probably should expect that the Norwegian kroner is going to continue to dwindle in value compared to the major currencies.
Yeah, and the oil fund itself, is massive. It's 485 trillion US dollars in size. For those who are interested, actually, it does hold a lot of stocks. I think when I did a report, I did a big report on it. I think it 5-6 years ago. It had 55% stocks at the time, but now it sits at almost 75. I don't know the exact number, but I think it sits at 75% now. Is stocks, and then the rest is most of it is then bonds, different kind of bonds around the world, and then a little bit of real estate that they have sprinkled in there. But the Norwegian oil fund, as you said, is a massive entity, and it's supposed to be there for the Norwegian people. You and me, Rune, I'm pretty sure we'll get our share of the Norwegian. Probably never,
very
but
likely.
Yeah, very likely. But again, yeah, sorry.
It's supposed to be sort of future pensions, because we have some public pension rights in Norway. So, but let's see. I don't know about that. Speaking of the fund, I think it was since 1998, since the start, it has generated on average 6%. Gross return.
Yeah,
and that's basically less than the price increase, the average price increase of gold in that period. I think what was the gold price increase? Was it 6.7% or something like that in the same period?
Yeah, because it kind of followed M2, right? You were talking about M2 was 7%, about 7% in that period. So it actually underperformed inflation in real terms.
Yeah. So, and I don't think they own the gold companies or anything like that. So they don't have any exposure to gold, at least not a significant amount, at least.
And not even the central bank of Norway. There's only a few Western countries that don't hold any gold in their central banks. And guess what?
We sold it in 2004. 2004, we sold all of it.
And there's a conspiracy theory behind that. I think the current finance minister at the time attended a Bilderberg meeting, and he then suddenly goes around. But at that time there was pressure on gold in 2002. It was kind of like gold was starting to rise because you had the .com bubble. There was starting to get friction with the US dollar, not trusting it so much because of higher inflation, and so people. The central banks had to go out and sell, and guess what? Who other is not owning any gold? It's Canada. Canada and Norway is the only ones that really don't have any gold anymore.
I think New Zealand as well.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
So there's only a few of us that have done very dumb policies, if you can look at it that way. Not that the central bank should exist or hold anything for us. We should hold our own gold. But again, it's pretty dumb. I remember I actually confronted the finance minister in 2016 here in Canada, and I asked him a question about why did you sell gold? It's like, oh, it's a barbarous relic, it's worth nothing. It's like, well, I think you will regret on that statement a few years. I said in 5-6 years from now, and sure enough, it went from at that time 1,600 Canadian dollars for an ounce of gold, and now it's sitting at 2,800. ounce of gold.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, you know, the Canadian dollar has severely underperformed as well. Like we haven't dropped as much as the Norwegian krona, but we dropped quite heavily as well. We went from, you know, about $1, almost par to the US dollar, down to 137. And so that has dropped tremendously as well. The funny thing though is that so we're dropping towards the US dollar, but the US dollar is also having heavy inflation. If you look at actual real inflation in the United States, it's more like 10-15%. If you go to a place called Shadow Stats, because he's followed the old in 1980s way of calculating inflation. And so what's interesting is that you are actually like our currencies are dropping so hard, whereas it's the United States dollar that is losing a tremendous amount of value to real things. And so we're in big trouble here. Both these countries that we live in are in very tremendous trouble, I think. Even though that the state has, you know, the Norwegian oil fund, you know, they could start selling that, but that would also put pressure on global stock prices. Selling, you know, 1% of any stock exchange is going to create a bit of ruckus, you know, in the markets. And of course, we got to remember, I looked at the oil fund during 2008 during the collapse in oil prices at the time. No, actually, oil prices went up at that time. Sorry. But what ended up happening, that had tremendous loss in equities. They were only at 50% in equities at the time, but they lost 33% in equities at the time. Well, how did they cover that loss? They just added some more oil revenue to hide it. And so but you actually had to go into the annual, you know, the consolidated financial statement to see that kind of stuff, because they don't publish that to the public. What's going on, right? But yeah, so interesting. So let's continue on. I know we've been talking, like getting a little bit off the grids there, but let's get back to Norway and you know, the current state, because there's a lot more happening in Norway now. Like, of course, we talked about that the krona has dropped tremendously. You know, it was 12.5 at one point during the lockdowns, and now it's dropped down. Like it's hovering between, I think, 10.4 to about 11. You know, Norwegian krona to US dollar. But so what has it been like to, you know, you're good, you know, in your ways, like you protected yourself, but for the general public, how's kind of life been looking for a lot of people around in Norway over the last 5 years?
That's a great question. I think it's you know, the lockdown was a wake-up call to many people, and yeah, just like in most other countries, I would say. But I think that the real pain most likely came after the lockdowns and when the inflation sort of became visible in spring of 2022 or something like that. So it's quite a short period that people have felt some real pain, I would say. Of course, you know, it's a very sort of gradual development where you can feel that traveling abroad, having your vacation in Spain in the summer or wintertime, you know, it's getting more expensive. Perhaps you don't order 3 courses when you are out eating in the evenings. Perhaps you only eat main course and dessert. You know, you adapt sort of, without doing it sort of consciously. But people felt it a lot from the summer of 2022 and until now, I think, and there's much more talk about it also, of course, the low value of the Norwegian kroner. So then people, it becomes much more real for people when it when it's something that people talk about a lot. It doesn't only sneak into our private economy like it used to do, but now it's something that we have a conscious relation to, I would say. So people are worried, and they see that the state is just grows and grows, and they give away more and more resources to other countries, and more political power, influence to Europe, to the EU. We have an agreement with the EU, which is called the EEA agreement, which basically means that we are part of the EU without having the right to vote, and we pay them to be allowed to trade with them. It's a stupid agreement, actually. So people are getting aware of. They begin to understand, wake up to the fact that it's a project which is out of control economically and also politically. But it's it's a whole lot of trust built into the Norwegian society. We are famous for trusting the politicians a whole lot. So it's quite a dramatic thing for many people, I think, to wake up to this new reality that they can't just sit back and trust their politicians anymore. Yeah, I think it hasn't been such a harsh wake up in Norway as it has been obviously in Canada the last few years with your government, with Trudeau and everything that he's doing constantly. But I think there is something going on now. It's people are restless and they are uncomfortable. They are they don't feel the same level of security anymore. They are concerned about the future. What's it going to be with like for our kids, for instance, the next generations? So yeah, it's very important that we start to have this conversation now, and I think my book came at a very good moment. It was much needed when I published it 1 year ago.
Yeah, it's very much apparent that Norwegians need to learn their monetary history and start to understand the ramifications of what inflation does to the value of your stored up value. Like most Norwegians never care about that I talk to never really thought about gold or silver or Bitcoin or any other things to protect their savings. They never thought about that they needed wealth insurance. What is that? Like, do I need to have something to protect my wealth, from inflation, which basically is eroding, slowly been eroding, it's been slowly there. But again, when inflation rears its ugly head, and what ends up happening is because you had so much government stimulus in Norway during the time, there was the government came in and subsidized, even during this was after COVID, actually. This was during the energy crisis in Europe, where you had actually during COVID, it was pretty insane for Norway as well, because massive loss. Norway is so dependent on the oil. And when you had negative $29 a barrel for oil, that's quite devastating for an oil country that have their offshore oil. You need about $60 oil, I think, in Norway to stay 55 or 60, depending on which oil field it is or whatever. But you need that oil price to stay above a certain place. And then suddenly what you saw during that time is that a lot of oil countries started to go away. Like Canada was starting to get hit hard. Nigeria, Norway was the biggest one that got hit really hard. Like Nigeria is in so much trouble now because of that oil price shock that came. And their state just inflated, into oblivion. Like now their inflation is 30-40%, their official inflation, and they're trying desperately to, cover the tracks by, we're going to go to a central bank digital currency, and then, try to cover it. But the Nigerians wouldn't have anything of it. They wouldn't adopt this slave grid. So, which is really good. But I think like where you come into a point here, an inflection point, and this is not just Norway, like the old countries, but every country around the world are starting to see like some severe issues happening around the world with their monetary system. People are starting to kind of they got a crash course in how inflation works, first of all, and how that really robs you of your value of your savings and everything. Now people that were about to retire, they're looking at 20% more probably that they need that they don't have. They're at age 60, they're getting ready to retire. And then suddenly it's like, oh shit, we're screwed now, because the government, had here in Canada, the stimulus was insane. Like they had something, they paid people more than the minimum wage, to not work. And it was 9 million out of the 36 million Canadians. A lot of them are kids, right? So probably 50% of the Canadian population almost were on, just sitting at home, getting paid more than minimum wage. And then we're shocked that we have like literally like 40, 50% food inflation. What's end up happening with inflation? It's interesting because inflation is not so much, government could print atrocious amounts of currency, but it's what they do with it. When they spend that into the economy through their programs, that money then directly starts being consumed. And what ends up happening is what, we were talking about M2, which is the supply of currency, but there's another important portion to that, which is the velocity of that currency and how fast it moves into the economy. And it's like supply and demand. You have a massive supply shock of currency, a huge amount of currency coming in and trying to buy the same things. Well, what ends up happening is when you have supply and demand, the prices will go up because it's going to cost more to try to get that one thing that everybody wants, right? So, and that's what ends up happening because now we have way bigger supply of currency chasing the same amount of goods and services, and there get inflation. That's the basic, the inflation that people actually understands and sees right there. Is that new supply of currency is coming in and then basically wanting to buy the same things, but now suddenly it's a lot more of it. And so now it's going to cost you a lot more because actually what ends up, like people say, oh, prices are going up. It's like, no, the value of the currency are going down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a whole lot of stuff to sort of to try to understand for people. And I think my book has helped a great deal here in Norway because I've been to, I've sold a few thousand copies here in Norway, and I've been to, I think this is the 28th podcast recording I'm having now in just a little bit more than 1 year, and the word is spreading. So people start to understand the relationship, the causality between monetary inflation, the increase in the money supply, and the price inflation, the general increases in prices. So yeah, 1 year ago, people were easier to fool for the government. Not so easy today. So we have a growing movement, I would say, here in Norway, where we demand we say that we have to have this policy discussion. We have to get more awareness about this, and it's much more difficult for the politicians and the banking system and the central bank to keep a lid on this discussion now. Yeah. So that's something which I'm very happy to see, because just a few years ago people didn't know shit about this, No. Not at all. Very few, just a few people who were especially interested in this topic that understood these issues. Very, very few people.
Yeah, there was, like Henry Ford said, 1 in a million, understands how our monetary system works. Now that has gone up quite a bit, actually. Over the last year, from voices like you, Rune, and me, and of course all the other people like Robert Kiyosaki, all these guys that are out there talking about these topics. More and more people are getting aware of, as Henry Ford said, if there was X amount of people knowing what was going on, there'd be revolution tomorrow, kind of thing. And people would want to get rid of it. Like, look at, for example, let's look at what's just happened today. So today was a interesting day. We had the first ever libertarian anarcho-capitalist president of a country getting inaugurated down in Argentina. And maybe to look at, what is happening in Norway and Canada, very similar countries, versus, where Argentina was. Argentina has been a massive socialist state, monetary failures. They devalued their currency so many times. They had a few hyperinflations through the last 100 years. So they really have been like a monetary basket case because of these policies and big government. I think it was 4 out of 10 people live in poverty in Argentina. And, I think the like almost like 60% of the Argentinian population was hired by the government and worked for government entities. And so you had this Milei guy coming in and ripping off, government agencies and wielding a chainsaw saying that we're going to cut the government.
Yeah.
And so we'll see what happens down there. But I think people had a kind of an awakening that, does it have to be that bad though? Like that's the question, because in Argentina, the heavy poverty, massive capital controls. They used to be one of the richest countries in the world, back in the 60s. Look at, for example, another basket case. You have Venezuela, which is, talking about Norway. Well, there's a few similarities. Norway and of course is a great oil country, and they created socialist policies. Same did Venezuela, and Venezuela was one of the richest countries in the 60s, so a little bit before Norway, got to their fame. But what ended up happening is they got an oil price shock, and then the government was so dependent on the oil income that it collapsed, and people suddenly be like, oh, my currency is not buying me anymore. So they started to try to get rid of it, purchasing other stuff. The trust disappeared, that value. And so the government ended up actually, because they couldn't tax people now, because people are using other mediums of exchange, the government had to print currency. And here's another one of those, where you go up and actually the last, so they had two hyperinflations there in about 5 years. So there's X amount of currency, that they were printing, and so they actually went to one currency, and then they had to do another one, but the other currency is failing. Well, what did the Venezuelans do to try to hide their shenanigans? Well, this is a 50 million note for those that don't understand. It's like, 50. So they just removed the zeros, to try to hide their monetary crimes from the population. But it hasn't been working. And again, the flight of people out of Venezuela, they've been, there's Venezuelans all over the U.S. I just watched a documentary about people coming from, the South America, from poor countries, try to get as immigrants up to the United States. Well, about 80% of them were Venezuelans. And so, you destroy the country, and then you have heavy taxation, big socialist policies, and that's where you're going to end up. Both Canada and Norway, in my opinion, is going to end up there if they don't get smarten up here and start looking at some options. But do we want to get to the level of poverty and problems that the Argentinians have had for like 5-6 decades? Do we want to be there? Like, do we want to get that poor before we actually rise up and try to say like, oh, maybe we want a very tiny government now? Is that where we're gonna people need to wake up. And so let's look at the actual options that we have to get back to that sound monetary policy, or even sound societal structures that existed back in Norway's history, where you had kind of a free market, basically, and the actual individual freedom was a lot higher. It's interesting that was the 900s. That's that long ago. We think that, they were brutal back then. They wouldn't care about human beings back then. They murdered each other, killed each other. But actually, when you let those things happen, where people are very free, everybody thinks that, we're gonna have anarchy. It's like, no. First of all, anarchy means no rulers. It doesn't mean no rules. But second of all, is chaos doesn't come when you have no government. You get a more polite society in the way that we actually have to be more honest to each other if we live without a government that is trying to manipulate us. And so how can we get to that, during what is the things and steps that you think we need to take soon? Because I don't want to end up like going through 30-40 more years of this. Like, it's going to be into your kids, like your kids are getting older, right? So like they're actually coming out now. Like, do we want this to go on for another 20-30 years, or do we smarten up and then try to revert back, like that pendulum? Can we push that pendulum back again? Because we're ticking very high up here, on the totalitarian side. Like, do we get so much trouble that we elect Hitler? Like, look at what happened with the Weimar Republic. They had a hyperinflation. People lost their life savings. They were desperate. And so they chose to elect a national socialist that said that, oh, we're going to do this and that, and it's going to be really great. The government's going to give you everything, that you're all safe. And then look at what ended up happening. You could like with democracies, you could actually end up electing these crazy people into power because it's democracy. You're free to choose whoever you want to elect in. So what can we do to get these ideas up? But what for most important, what is some of the solutions that could be done to potentially like take places like Norway and Canada that have been they're very resource dependent economies that kind of like let their stake grow because they have resources and they don't really care. But what ends up happening is, as we see with Venezuela, with Argentina, huge examples of massive wealth built up and a great fortune and a very productive society to then go to the destructive poverty, that we've seen in those two countries. How can we avoid it? It's a big question, but
it's the biggest. It's the most important question, and I'm very glad that you ask it. Just to revert back a few years, because in 2010 I had studied economics and the monetary systems and the policies associated with that for quite a few years, but I didn't have anybody to talk about these issues with subjects with at that time. So I grew tired. I tried to talk with my friends and colleagues, etc., and they didn't respond very much. They sort of felt bothered by my talk about this, so I gave up on the project and took a break for about 12 years, And when I published the book, I suddenly realized that I had an audience for something that I didn't think anyone would read. I hoped perhaps I could sell a few hundred copies of my book, but to those who were especially interested in the subject. But what had happened in the meantime was that this Bitcoin community has grew a whole lot, not only in Norway, but all over the world. So basically there were takers for my of my storytelling and the takers of these ideas, because there were people out there with knowledge and the values that I shared with them. We had the same values, the same thoughts, basically. That made me a whole lot more optimistic from the get-go 1 year ago than I used to be. And what has happened afterwards is that I've become even more optimistic. And here's my take. My take is that the monetary system, it's the strongest social network in society. It's much stronger than the internet, for instance, and the internet is a very strong social network that we know very well. So why is it so important and why is it so powerful? And I think it's because of two things. First of all, it makes us a monetary system makes us an exchange value, and we use it as a medium of exchange in order to cooperate with people that we don't know, people who we don't trust. That makes it very powerful. But the other component of it is that it conveys information and it conveys knowledge and understanding, both explicit understanding and knowledge, and also implicit or sort of a subconscious type of understanding. And here comes my point. When you get something like Bitcoin, which is the biggest or the fastest growing financial asset that the human race has ever seen, has ever witnessed, it has grown so rapidly, so fast. It's amazing. And this isn't a system that lives on the side of the fiat monetary system. It coexists and it connects to the same total overall monetary system that we make use of. And it's almost like it creates some sort of what do you call it, transfusion. You know, when you connect the tubes to your body when you're at the hospital, and they give you fresh blood, you know, which is sort of clean and without the disease that you have in your body, and then sort of you become more healthy because you get healthy blood into your system. It's a little bit of the same with Bitcoin. It's a much sounder monetary system than compared with the fiat money, and it conveys a message at the same time. It makes it possible for us as humans to compare the Bitcoin monetary system with the traditional national currencies, which are being used to extract wealth from the people. So it creates a whole lot of discussion between people. For instance, if you approach me and say, well, Rune, I would like to buy your car, but can I pay with Bitcoin, for instance? And if I don't know anything about Bitcoin, at least it creates a discussion where you communicate some knowledge to me about. You explain to me something about the current monetary system, and you also tell me about something about Bitcoin. So it increases raises the awareness throughout society when you have these two competing and also coordinated monetary systems. They don't just coexist; they exist in a sort of weird type of symbiosis, actually. And also, it's not only the concrete knowledge that is being transferred, exchanged from those who understand the monetary systems, and to those who don't understand anything about it. But it's also the sort of the implicit knowledge, the understanding that it's something weird going on here. I don't know really what it is, but I feel sort of attracted to this sound, to this monetary system, which seems more sound, where the value of the money goes up instead of being reduced all the time. So I think this is something that never has happened in our history before. So which makes it very difficult to understand or to predict what is going to happen in the future. We can't look back in time and try to interpret past events and project that towards the future and say, well, since this and that happened with the fiat monetary systems in the future, then also this will happen now in our future. In the past, this will also sort of repeat itself, and so we will have a cyclus of 30 years from now, then everything will go to hell or something like that. But we can't make that type of same type of predictions these days. And what's very important here for me to understand, and also not only to understand it but to make active use of it, it's how fast can we expect that this system will convey the information to people who don't understand anything about the monetary system today. And also, how can we make better use of this opportunity in order to spread the message to thousands and millions of people? And I think actually that we can make good use of it if we understand what people are interested in. For instance, some people are interested in investing in Bitcoin. You know, they want to get rich fast. Others, they just want the safety. And some people are attracted to it because of the technology. Other types of people because of political reasons, because they hate the growing that they see that the state is growing so fast. So if we are able to understand better how to make use of this in terms of strengthening the social layer and affecting people's belief systems. If we are able to do that, I'm quite optimistic, actually.
Yeah, and I think that's totally possible. Like today, like before kind of the before we had the government lockdowns, well, people thought of the state quite highly still, and so on, and nobody really questioned that. But after that happened, after all the kind of they showed their cards, with what they can do, and so they basically showed us their totalitarian ways, and what the system really is all about in its final state. And so I think a lot of people are questioning. It's an idea whose time has come, basically. I'd say where we're finally starting to really question the social layer, and I talk to so many people from around the world that are starting to ask these similar questions, and I think like the way of understanding the actual systemic layer, which is of course society itself, but then the money is the most important thing. That if you have a bad system, you actually corrupt everything that touches that system. And if you have a good system, you really like then push more towards a freedom type aspect. But again, you don't need just like Bitcoin. Bitcoin is fantastic, by the way. I love Bitcoin. I've been involved in it for a very long time. But if you have a free market, as you said, where everyone is free to use whatever type of currencies that they have in a system, you really give the power to then people just transact and use whatever they feel like. And Bitcoin is definitely going to be a huge, massive part of that transactional layer in society. And I think it's going to be quite exciting. Now, there's a few different approaches to this. Like in El Salvador, for example, they chose to go the way of the state. Like by decree, we're gonna be forced now to use Bitcoin, which is it's okay. Like I don't like the state, but it's better, to then decree that you should use Bitcoin than it is to use fiat currency. Now, other places, they're looking at getting rid of the Argentinian peso now and the central bank in Argentina, and then potentially use the US dollar. Well, how about you just also then make it basically free to use currencies? And it seems like maybe that is the way that they're kind of leaning towards. Let's hope so. Is that when you get those ideas out there, you will have people then moving towards those ideas, and they become more. When you have a guy like Milei, everybody in the Western media is just villainizing him. But when you listen to his ideas, they're all about freedom-oriented type of things, even though he might get corrupted by the power, because power does corrupt. At least those ideas came out there, and people are now starting to like look at those ideas, like anarcho-capitalism, like libertarianism, and more freedom-oriented type of ideas, where the individual is put first. You have all the rights, but then again, people are so afraid of that. It's like, especially in Norway and Canada, we're very much, governed by, for the greater good. That's what we always hear. But when you actually put the rights within the freedom of the individual first instead of the collective, you actually will then ultimately everybody would become a lot freer, and I'd say more polite. Like I've been to places that are way more kind of leaning towards more individual type of beliefs, and it's quite the polite society. I've been around a lot of people that are in these movements, and most of them are very good people. They're not, people like, of course, you get people, drama, whatever you go, because we're human beings, but again, they're more leaning into the way of voluntarily make transactions with each other for our goods and services that we might have to present to people. And so when you get that, you would just I think anyways, reading throughout history and then taking a look at that, I would by 10,000% want to live in a society that chooses to give people the individual freedom and rights. But you know, there, you got to remember, people are so afraid. It's like, oh well, what if he goes and kills someone? It's like, no, there's always consequences. But you got to be. I would rather live in a society that I'd be willing to take the consequences for my own actions, rather than, you know, the state being in there controlling everything over me, and of course destroying the value of my work. Because basically what work is, and that's, you know, comes back to Bitcoin, where, you know, that there's work in to create the actual currencies. There has to be put energy into it, or else it's pretty much worthless when you look at it. So when you put like basically money is really our work and what we do with our lives. It's our energy, you know, our very energy of or creating something is what really is the then creates the money layer, and then the transaction of our labor, basically, that we do as human beings. And I think what we can do here is just let's just try to look at these ideas and be open to especially question the current state of affairs with you know, big monopoly governments and their currencies that constantly is losing value. They're taking more and more of our money, and if we don't stop it, we're going to end up at places that's going to be pretty dark in history, I think. And that's where we're heading if these central bankers keep on, you know, pushing their agendas and trying to repair the completely damaged system that is not working. It never works, by the way. Like it's like a Ponzi scheme. You know, you have to constantly have growth in debt, and if that debt collapses, the whole Ponzi scheme falls apart. And so why not try to, you know, bet on freedom instead of betting on potentially going to some very dark places? I would rather want to be, and as you said, you know, even in the Soviet Union, you know, they had a real free market. It was just hidden under the veil of communism, basically. So people want to be free. People want to have the opportunity to, you know, be able to give and do whatever we really want, as long as we, like, you know, there has to be rules in society, but they can be very simple. You know, just don't murder each other. Be polite people. Like, we don't need. You're a lawyer, for example. Like, you think about, you know, all the laws, you know, and that it's pretty thick, right? Like, how about simplifying that, right? So.
Don't get me started.
Yeah, don't get me started. Yeah, that's probably, maybe that's another episode for us later to talk about something like that. But we're already 2 hours into our great conversation here, so probably that might end up being 4 or 5. But anyways, it's been a real pleasure having you on, Rune. And if you want to just wrap up with some final words and thoughts, and then we'll call it a day. And I would love to probably have you back on again.
Yeah, definitely. I would love to come back and have another talk with you. This has been great, John. So thanks for inviting me. I think I would just finish off with a few words about Milei, the new president of Argentina. It might be that he is not able to do so much now that he has the power, and he will be exposed to all kind of shenanigans, you know, and perhaps he even will be corrupted. Most people are corrupted by power. But what I understand from what he has done so far is that he has been a messenger, and he has been an educator, and he has inspired many people, especially from the youth in Argentina. So they stand up and they ask their teachers, their professors, and confront them with the new knowledge that they have been exposed to with regards, for instance, to monetary policy, etc. And they ask, is it really so that we need inflation? Is inflation good for society, good for the economy? You know, and there's a pushback there, I think. So he has spread knowledge and ideas, very important ideas about freedom. And although not all of the people who voted for him believe in the same ideas and have the same level of understanding, the important thing is that a small percentage, they have embraced Milei and his ideas, and that's what's going to build the new Argentina, the new economy that they will have. It will probably take many years before we see the results, but if it catches on, it can develop very quickly. If he introduces monetary freedom in Argentina, as he has said that he wants to do, I think we will see results immediately, and that they will attract talent and capital from all over the world. People will go to Argentina and try to make a living there. So I'm optimistic, mainly because he has been such a very important messenger and educator, and he has given many people like me hope in the sense that we see that this is a very popular message, and not so much hope in sort of believing that the system works. Finally, the system works. It's not like that. It's not hope in that sense, but it's more like sort of a more positive thinking about our fellow man, and that other people think this is very important too. And we are a growing community. That's very important. So so Milei made me very happy. I hope he will continue to deliver the message, although perhaps he will not be able to implement so many of the policy proposals that he made, the promises. But that's how it is with politics. Yeah.
No, it's a virus, you know, no pun intended here, but it's a virus that is spreading, and might do the opposite of what the other virus did.
Yeah,
instead of lockdowns, it would be complete openness.
Yeah, it's a benign virus. I like this virus. Yeah, definitely.
So so Rune, where can people find more about you and all your content and your books and everything? If you want to just put that, everything is going to be below in the comments, by the way, all your links to whatever important information you have and so on. But where can people find more about you?
So if they go to X, formerly known as Twitter, and they will find me. You can put the handle in the show notes. I'm quite active on X. I write a lot about monetary policy, a lot about politics in general. And I also have a website, which is Undoco, that's UNDOQO, Undoco.com. There you can read a little bit more about my books, and of course you find my books on Amazon as well.
Fantastic, Rune. It's been a pleasure having you on, and we'll see more of you soon. So that'll be the end of our interview, and we'll talk to you guys very soon here. Just 1 second, we'll just end it here.